The Israelites, God's chosen people, found themselves at a crossroads. For generations, they lived under God's direct leadership, guided by judges. However, the people desired a king, a visible leader, like the nations around them. They wanted someone to unite them and lead them in battle. This desire, though understandable, reflected a growing distance between the people and God. They began to seek security in human strength rather than divine guidance. God granted their request, but not without warning. Through the prophet Samuel, God cautioned the Israelites about the burdens a king would bring. They would face taxation, conscription, and a potential loss of personal freedom. Samuel emphasized that God remained their true king, but the people, caught up in their desire for earthly security, pressed on. Their desire for a king ultimately stemmed from a lack of faith in God's continued provision and protection. In the midst of this tumultuous period, a young man named Saul emerged from the tribe of Benjamin. He was tall and handsome, a stark contrast to the image of power the Israelites might have envisioned. Initially, Saul himself displayed remarkable humility. "Am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel, and is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me?" When Samuel anointed him as king, Saul questioned his own worthiness. Saul's humility, however, ran deeper than mere words. When some Israelites opposed his kingship, Saul didn't retaliate. He quietly returned to his father's fields, content with a simple life. This act showcased Saul's initial trust in God's plan, even if it didn't align with his own expectations. It was this humility, coupled with his physical stature, that marked Saul as God's chosen leader. Saul's reign began with promise. He quickly proved himself a capable military leader, securing victories against Israel's enemies. His courage and tactical acumen united the Israelites and brought a sense of national pride. Under Saul's leadership, Israel experienced a period of relative peace and prosperity. His victories served as tangible evidence of God's favor upon him and the nation. One of Saul's most celebrated victories came against the Ammonites. When the Ammonites threatened the Israelite city of Jabesh-Gilead, Saul rallied his forces and decisively defeated them. This victory solidified Saul's position as king and earned him the unwavering support of the people. It seemed that God had indeed chosen well, and Saul was destined for greatness. However, the seeds of Saul's downfall were sown even amidst his triumphs. His initial humility gradually gave way to pride and self-reliance. He started acting less like a vessel of God's will and more like a king in his own right. He began to place his own judgment above God's clear commands. This shift in Saul's heart marked the beginning of his downfall. One of the first instances of Saul's disobedience occurred when he was commanded to destroy the Amalekites completely. Instead of following God's instructions fully, Saul spared the Amalekite king and kept some of their livestock. When confronted by Samuel, Saul justified his actions, claiming he had saved the best for sacrifices to God. This act of partial obedience revealed a dangerous flaw in Saul's character. He valued his own judgment above God's clear commands. As Saul continued to stray from God's path, a young shepherd named David entered the scene. David, known for his courage and faith, gained fame by defeating the Philistine giant, Goliath. Saul, initially impressed by David, soon became consumed by jealousy. He saw David's popularity as a threat to his own power and security. Saul's jealousy festered into paranoia and rage. He made several attempts on David's life, driving the young man into hiding. Saul's actions demonstrated a complete departure from the humble beginnings of his reign. He had become consumed by fear and insecurity, allowing his heart to be poisoned by envy. Saul's descent continued as he drifted further from God. He consulted a medium, seeking guidance from the dead, a practice strictly forbidden by God. This act of desperation revealed the depth of Saul's spiritual decline. He had reached a point where he no longer sought God's will, but instead relied on forbidden practices. In a final act of defiance, Saul led the Israelites into battle against the Philistines. Weakened by his own disobedience and paranoia, Saul's army suffered a crushing defeat. Saul himself, mortally wounded, fell on his own sword, marking a tragic end to a reign that had begun with such promise. Saul's story stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of pride. His initial humility and willingness to follow God's guidance paved the way for his early successes. However, as his heart turned inward, prioritizing his own desires and judgments over God's commands, his reign crumbled. He allowed pride to cloud his judgment, leading him down a path of disobedience and destruction. Saul's pride manifested itself in his unwillingness to acknowledge his mistakes. When confronted by Samuel about his disobedience, Saul made excuses and minimized the severity of his actions. He was more concerned with preserving his image and authority than with seeking forgiveness and restoration. This refusal to humble himself before God ultimately sealed his fate. Saul's story also highlights the devastating consequences of disobedience. God had entrusted Saul with a significant responsibility, but Saul chose to disregard God's clear instructions. His partial obedience, rooted in pride and self-preservation, ultimately cost him everything: his kingdom, his family, and his life. Saul's disobedience had far-reaching consequences, impacting not only his own life but also the lives of those around him. His jealousy of David led to years of strife and bloodshed, dividing the nation he was meant to lead. His actions serve as a sobering reminder that disobedience to God never occurs in a vacuum, but creates ripple effects that touch the lives of many. In contrast to Saul's downward spiral, the life of David, his successor, demonstrates the power of humility and unwavering trust in God. David, despite his own human weaknesses, constantly sought God's guidance and acknowledged his dependence on God. He recognized that true kingship involved submitting to a higher authority, not exalting oneself above others. David's life teaches us that true leadership requires recognizing our limitations and placing our trust in God's wisdom and strength. It involves seeking God's will above our own desires and acknowledging that true success comes from aligning ourselves with his purposes. David's example inspires us to lead with humility, seeking God's guidance in every decision and trusting in his plan, even when it unfolds differently than we expect. The story of King Saul, while tragic, offers timeless lessons for us all. It reminds us that leadership is not about power or self-preservation, but about serving others and remaining obedient to God's call. It teaches us that true humility involves acknowledging our dependence on God, submitting to his will, and seeking his forgiveness when we fall short. As we navigate the complexities of our own lives, let us remember the lessons learned from both Saul's triumphs and his failures. Let us strive to lead with humility, seeking God's guidance in all that we do. Let us prioritize obedience to God's commands, trusting that his ways are higher than our own. And let us, like David, cultivate a heart of trust and dependence on God, knowing that true success and fulfillment are found in aligning our lives with his perfect will.